It is winter in Istanbul, sometime after the 5th hour of night, and the palace on the hill is holding its breath. The roofs of Topkapi glitter with a thin skin of frost, but inside the harem corridors the air is too warm, too close, infested with the smell of sweat, rosewater, and burning resin. Somewhere beyond these walls, the city roars with taverns and markets and the crashing of waves against the Seraglio Point. Here, in this inner maze of tiles and latticework, a girl walks barefoot over cold marble, her ankles trembling with each step. She has been told she is blessed. She has seen enough to suspect that she is prey. By the time the silk curtain in front of her stirs, she already knows 3 things. She will be touched, she will be judged, and if she fails, the Bosphorus is waiting. The corridor that carries her forward is narrow and high, its walls covered with deep blue Iznik tiles that shout scenes of paradise into a space that smells like captivity. Lamps spit and flicker, their smoke clinging to the underside of the arches. The shadows of eunuchs stretch long over the tiles, bending and breaking as they move ahead of her. Behind the wooden lattice screens along the sides, shapes shift. Other girls pretending not to watch. Older attendants whose eyes have seen this procession too many times to feel anything but weary calculation. Somewhere, a door clicks shut. The sound so small, it still feels like a verdict. The girl's name is no longer the one her mother gave her. The palace stripped it from her the day she arrived. Tonight, for the first time, her new name is written beside the Sultan's in a ledger that will decide whether she rises, disappears, or becomes a warning whispered after lamps are blown out. Hours earlier, when the sun was still dragging pale light through the grated windows of the training dormitory, she stood in a line of bodies, each one oiled and polished like wares laid out in a market. Girls from villages, mountains, and distant coasts stood shoulder to shoulder, linen shifts sticking to their backs, listening for the soft slap of the eunuch's sandals. The Kızlar Ağa, the chief black eunuch, walked slowly down the row with an ivory tablet in his hand. He had seen hundreds of faces, and tonight he was not paid to remember any of them. He checked their teeth as if examining horses. He fingered their wrists, counting the pace of their pulse. He lifted chins with 2 fingers and tilted heads toward the light to see if their eyes were clear or clouded by illness or terror. When he reached her, he frowned, not in disapproval but in concentration, as if doing sums in his head. A piece of chalk scratched across her bare shoulder. The mark was small, easily hidden beneath fabric, but it might as well have been a brand. Girls exhaled in relief when he passed them by. One older woman muttered that being overlooked was a mercy. The back of the overseer's hand cracked across her mouth. No one answered her after that. The palace calls what comes next purification. The body remembers it as something closer to stripping. The girl is led into a hammam deep in the harem complex, where steam hangs so thick it blurs the edges of the world. The marble floor is slick under her feet. Elderly slave women descend on her with practiced hands, their faces impassive, their fingers merciless. Rough mitts scrape her skin until it is red and stinging. Hot water scalds her shoulders and then turns too cold too quickly, leaving her muscles shivering. They shave her, trim her, pluck her. Wax-soaked cloth clings to the softest parts of her body, ripped away in swift, unannounced jerks. Pain flares and dies in waves, but she has learned that making noise invites more humiliation. Blood mixes with rose-scented steam, and the result is something sickly sweet, like flowers thrown on a battlefield. In a corner, a matron with sharp fingers keeps a careful calendar marked with the private cycles of dozens of women. She checks the date against the girl's body, muttering under her breath. Men write laws. Women enforce them in rooms like this. If the timing is wrong, the night might be postponed. If it is too wrong, suspicion stains the girl permanently. Unclean, unsuitable, possibly deceitful. Another attendant pushes her knees apart and searches for signs that someone else has been here before. There is no softness in her touch. No apology, only speed and efficiency. A girl suspected of coming to the harem with a hidden past can be banished, beaten, or worse, and no one will admit, afterward, exactly which rule she broke. When the scrubbing and cutting are done, and her skin stings under every brush of air, one of the older women pours a line of scented oil down her spine and spreads it with the flat of her palm. The oil smells of amber and something bitter she cannot name. Words are spoken over her womb, part prayer, part formula, asking that she be fruitful for the house of Osman. The woman's voice is not unkind, but it is detached. To her, the body under her hands is a task. To the palace, it is an investment. To the girl, it is the only thing she still owns, and she is discovering how little that means. From the heat of the bath, she is passed into a smaller chamber where everything feels too cold, too sharp. The Kızlar Ağa sits cross-legged at a low table, a large leather-bound register open in front of him. A scribe waits, pen poised. The air here smells of ink and tallow, a bureaucrat's world. The girl is made to stand, naked beneath a thin cloth, while men who are not allowed to touch her now enumerate her value with dispassionate voices. Her old name is crossed out if it was written there at all. Her new name, the one they gave her when they made her repeat the Shahada in a language she barely understood, is written beside her assumed origin: Bosnian, Greek, Circassian, Albanian. A single word stands where once there was a village, a family, a riverbank she used to walk. Next to her entry, there is a space left blank for tonight's outcome. If she conceives, a line will connect her name to that of a prince. That single stroke of ink can move her from a crowded dormitory to her own chamber, from a shared bowl of stew to servants of her own, from a stipend barely enough for clothes to a position that makes men in the outer court bow slightly when she passes. If she fails, the blank space might stay blank forever, and in time her name will be crossed out again, this time not to be replaced. The eunuch recites numbers in a low voice: what the palace paid for her at market, the cost of her training, the clothing allocations, the hypothetical dowry if the Sultan never calls for her again and she is married off to some mid-level official as a discarded luxury. Her future is a column of expenses and hoped-for returns. No one asks whether she wants any of those possibilities. In this room, want is irrelevant. Only cost and outcome matter. Night in the harem feels different from night anywhere else in the city. Outside, the sea hums against the shore and distant songs carry from taverns. Inside the palace, the sounds shrink. A single sandal scuffing marble, the whisper of silk sleeves, the occasional echo of a distant door slamming shut like thunder in a cave. The girl's hair has been dried and arranged. Jewels have been pushed into her ears and hair, their weight unfamiliar, their edges biting into the skin behind her ears. A sheer veil covers her head, but it does not hide the way her throat pulses. A strip of soft cloth is tied over her eyes. The world becomes sound and smell. A hand grips her upper arm, not cruelly, but firmly, and pulls her forward. The journey from the women's quarters to the Sultan's private rooms is a geography lesson she is not meant to remember. Turns come without warning. Doors open and close with barely a sound. At one point, she feels fresh air brush her face and smells the faint salt of the sea, proof that there are windows somewhere nearby, and then the scent is gone, replaced again by closed stone and incense. The blindfold is not just modesty, it is strategy. The Empire's way of ensuring that even those who touch the heart of power cannot map a way back to it on their own terms. When her feet stop, the silence feels heavier than any wall. The blindfold is slipped away. For a second, her eyes blur, adjusting from darkness to layered gold and shadow. The Sultan's chamber is not as large as she expected, but every surface inside it radiates wealth. Heavy brocade curtains muffle the outer world. The walls are covered not just in tiles, but in textiles, rich, dark fabrics that swallow light. Lamps burn with perfumed oil. The air smells of musk, amber, and smoke. At the center of the room is the thing everything else exists to surround: a raised platform piled with cushions and furs, its sheets the color of deep wine. When she lifts her gaze higher, she sees him. Sultan Murad III is not the monster she imagined in childhood nightmares. He is a man in his 30s with dark, watchful eyes, a trimmed beard, and a body softened by rich food and long hours sitting over state papers. He is draped in layers of cloth that gleam when he moves, ringed hands resting casually on his knees. He has been to war in his youth. Now his battles are fought with signatures, decrees, and the quiet arrangement of bodies in beds and graves. He does not address her immediately. He studies her, the way the eunuch studied her in the dormitory, but with another kind of interest layered over it, part curiosity, part habit, part entitlement. She remembers every instruction drilled into her by the women who trained her. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look directly at his face for too long, but do not keep your eyes on the floor like a sulking child. Move when beckoned. Freeze when he is still. Above all, do not show disgust, resistance, or boredom. The wrong expression can kill as quickly as a knife. For a long heartbeat, neither of them speaks. Her bare feet are cold against the polished floor. Her palms are damp. Her throat is so dry that swallowing hurts. When he does move, it is with a deceptive gentleness. He crooks one finger and she steps forward. His hand rises, fingers brushing her chin, tilting her face up. The skin of his palm is warm. The callus is faint. He writes more than he wields a sword now. His fingers smell of ink and musk and the faint bitterness of whatever herbs the palace physicians make him drink for his own health. Up close, his eyes look tired, as if there is something in him that has been consumed long before she arrived. He studies her face the way a man examines a new manuscript, checking for flaws, for interest, for opportunities. From where did they bring you? His voice is softer than she expected, almost conversational. but the room answers it with silence, as if the walls themselves are listening. "From the mountains, my lord," she manages, her voice thin and raw. "But tonight, from your mother's house." For a flicker of a second, something passes over his face. Amusement, maybe, or surprise that she knows the formula, acknowledging that the harem is formally the domain of the Valid Sultan, his mother. It is a tiny flash of human response in a night otherwise constructed like a ritual. It does not make her safer. If anything, it reminds her that this man has moods, preferences, whims, and that the entire apparatus of palace law bends around them. What happens next is what everyone has been preparing her for since the day she arrived, and yet none of their instructions fully match the reality. He leads, she follows. The bed is not just a bed. It is a stage where every flinch and sigh might be reported and encoded later in shorthand in the eunuch's ledger. She is conscious of the way her breath sounds too loud in her own ears. She is conscious of the scrape of his beard against her cheek, the surprising weight of his body, the oppressive heat trapped under the canopy. Somewhere in the room, beyond the curtains, there are people who will come back in as soon as he leaves to judge what they find. She forces her muscles to obey what they taught her. Relax when touched, respond in measured ways. Do not go limp like a corpse. Do not claw like an enemy. The whole thing feels like walking a line strung above a pit. In the morning, or what feels like morning, though the room still glows with artificial light, she is no longer the center of anything. The Sultan is gone. The chamber feels bigger without him, emptier, colder. Her body aches in small, specific ways. The sheets are rumpled, faint stains mingled with the smoke-heavy scent of the lamps. The same attendants who prepared her arrive with basins and cloths, their faces unreadable. They strip the bed with efficient hands, folding linen so that any blood or evidence disappears inside the layers. They glance at her, at the bed, at each other, making assessments they do not share aloud. One of them helps her stand, not roughly but without tenderness, fingers digging into her elbow just enough to remind her she has no say in what comes next. In a neighboring chamber, the Kuzlar Ah will be unrolling the ledger again, ready to add a mark beside her name. There won't be space to recount anything she thought or felt. There will be a symbol, a note, a quiet judgment passed along the invisible channels of palace bureaucracy. Suitable, unsuitable. To be summoned again, not recommended. Those few words can tilt her life toward a private room and better food, or back toward the crowded dormitory where women fade into the background until someone decides they are too old, too troublesome, or too expensive to keep. The horror of this first night is not only in the fear of strangling cords or burlap sacks. It is in waking up and realizing that even the most intimate injuries and humiliations have been anticipated, priced, and filed away. The girl does not yet know whether she has conceived. She does not know whether the man who held her chin in his hand remembers her face at all. All she knows, as the attendants lead her away from the bed and back into the maze of corridors, is that something irreversible has happened. The palace has finished turning her from person into entry, and the ledger, somewhere in the dark, is waiting for the next line of ink. They do not take her back the way she came. That is the first thing she notices. The corridor leading away from the Sultan's chamber feels longer, colder, less ornate, as if the palace itself has already decided that whatever softness it showed her on the way in is no longer required. The blindfold does not return. There is no need now to hide the route. She has already crossed the threshold that matters. The eunuch guiding her keeps his hand clamped around her arm, fingers iron hard, but his eyes slide over her without interest. For him, she is one more task completed before dawn, one more body delivered where it was ordered and now being carried back to storage. The dormitory is almost silent when she enters. Almost, but not completely. Bodies lie under thin blankets on raised platforms, some turned to the wall, some on their backs with eyes closed but not truly asleep. The air is damp with breath and the faint sourness of many bodies in a single space. The women know the sound of the latch on that door, the particular rhythm of feet returning from the Sultan's wing. No one moves right away. It is dangerous to appear too curious, too eager for news of someone else's fate. Her legs threaten to give way. She lowers herself onto her bedding as slowly as she can manage, every muscle stiff, the weight of her new jewelry pressing against her skin like accusations. Eventually, the whispers begin. Not directly to her. Not yet. On the far side of the room, one girl shifts and asks another, too loudly, whether it's morning already. Closer by, a woman whose hair is already threaded with gray murmurs the names of prayers. Not for the Sultan, not for the empire, but for daughters turned into numbers. The overseer on duty cracks her knuckles pointedly, a reminder that talk is allowed only on her terms. The dormitory settles back into a tense, unnatural quiet. The girl curls onto her side, staring at the faint line of light under the door. She feels both heavier and less present, as if part of her is still lying on that raised bed, pinned under the gaze of a man who may have already forgotten her. The women who trained her had warned her without warning. They never described exactly what would happen, but their jokes, their silences, their sudden stops when they saw a eunuch approach had all been lessons. Survive the night, they told her without words, and then survive the weeks that follow. Survival now has a new dimension she can feel with every shallow breath. Time. For the first time, each day is not just another day of chores and drills. It is part of a countdown she cannot see, measured in cycles and symptoms, in the way older women look at her face and then at her belly as if expecting answers written on her skin. She learns quickly that the first night is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of the next stage of inspection. Palace physicians start to visit the dormitories with more regularity, their presence announced by the smell of herbs and the sound of wooden boxes opening to reveal small jars and packets. They do not look like the butchers soldiers fear. They look like scholars, with ink stains on their fingers and beards streaked with gray. Their eyes are clinical, not cruel, but the effect is the same. They ask questions about her bleeding, her appetite, her sleep. They prod her belly with flat, practiced hands, listening not to her answers but to their own experience. One afternoon, as weak winter light tries and fails to force its way through the latticed windows, they place a small clay cup in her hand. The liquid inside is dark and smells of metal and earth. She brings it to her nose and recoils, but an older attendant's hand closes over hers and tips it upward. It tastes worse than it smells, bitterness flooding her tongue and crawling down her throat. It is supposed to strengthen her womb, they tell her, to coax life into being if the Sultan's seed took root. There is no room in their explanation for the possibility that she does not want that life. Her body has become a field they are determined to farm, and fields are not asked for consent. Days stretch and contract at the same time. Hours of menial work, sewing, cleaning, learning verses, practicing the graceful movements expected of a woman who might someday be summoned again, are punctuated by sudden, sharp intrusions. Another examination, a call to report to a senior woman, the clanking of keys at the belt of the Kuzlar as he enters the dormitory, and everyone straightens as if pulled by unseen strings. She lives inside a loop of waiting. Every missed bleeding, every pang in her stomach, every wave of nausea feels loaded. Other girls see the changes before she does. They have learned to read each other the way men read books in the outer courts. One morning, the older matron who keeps the cycle calendar summons her quietly. The room where they meet is small and airless. Rolls of parchment bearing rows of neat black script are stacked in niches in the wall, each one a record of private tides. The matron taps a line with her finger, then looks up, eyes sharp enough to pierce the girl's thin composure. There is no smile, no celebration, just a nod. "We will see," she says. "We will watch." It is the closest thing to good news the girl has heard in months, and even that comes wrapped in caution. To conceive is to move closer to safety and closer to danger at the same time. A child can lift a woman to power. It can also paint a target on her back so bright that even walls feel it. The news changes how other women look at her. Some offer small kindnesses, an extra spoonful of stew, a place closer to the brazier on cold nights, a whispered prayer murmured near her ear when they think the overseer isn't listening. Others keep their distance, calculating what her possible rise could mean for the delicate web of alliances and rivalries that crisscrosses the harem. One girl whose own first night ended with a return to anonymity watches her with a gaze that hurts more than open hostility. It is full of something like grief, as if she is watching someone else step onto a path she narrowly avoided but cannot stop thinking about. Food arrives differently now. Portions are slightly larger, richer. Meat appears more frequently in her bowl. Sweet puddings studded with nuts show up often enough to feel intentional. It is all part of the investment. The palace directs resources at her body the way it directs funds to campaigns and buildings. If she bears a son, it will have been worthwhile. If she does not, the extra cost will be added to the ledger in invisible ink, another small irritation in the palace accounts. She chews slowly, tasting not just the honey and spices, but the expectation baked into every mouthful. Outside the women's wing, beyond walls she cannot cross, decisions are being made about her that she will never hear discussed. In the apartments of the Valid Sultan, the real architect of the harem's inner workings sits surrounded by silks, servants, and information. Nurbanu has spent decades turning the narrow roles allowed to her into a throne as real as any in the palace. She knows about the girl's night. She knows about the physician's new interest. She knows about every womb in this building that might carry a child whose veins will run with the same blood as her son's. To Nurbanu, Aishi is not a person. She is a variable in an equation that spans generations. The Valide Sultan does not storm or rage. She does not need to. A slight change in the order of who is presented and when, a quiet word to the Kızlar about who has been too bold or too slow to learn. An adjustment to the schedule of teachings and baths, all of these are tools as sharp as any soldier's blade. If she decides that the girl's potential child threatens the balance she has built, Aishi's world will shift again without anyone ever telling her why. One night she may simply find herself moved to a different dormitory, or told she is being transferred to a secondary palace for her own good, or find that her name no longer appears in the rhythm of visits and inspections. Power here rarely kills loudly. It erases quietly. Not all of the women at the center of this web see the harem only as a machine of terror. Safiye, the Sultan's favorite consort, has learned to squeeze out of it what control she can. To her, the first night is both trap and ladder. She knows exactly how it feels to walk that corridor, to lie under that gaze. She also knows what it means to turn that experience into influence. When the girl's condition becomes harder to ignore, when her belly begins to rise in a way no one can attribute to better food, Safiye sends for her. The room where they meet is unlike the bare, functional spaces of the dormitory. It is thick with color and fabric, every surface softened by cushions and draped textiles. The air smells of expensive perfumes, the kind that never reach the general population of concubines. Safiye reclines against a mound of pillows, her posture relaxed but her eyes razor keen. She looks only a little older than the girl, but the difference between them is the difference between a knife and the hand that holds it. So, Safiye says, once the formal greetings are exchanged and the attendants have withdrawn to what they pretend is a discreet distance, they say you carry him. The girl's hands fly instinctively to her belly. She nods, throat too tight to trust with words. Safiye watches the movement, noting fear, humility, hope. All of these are familiar to her. She has felt them, watched them, used them. For a moment, there is something almost like sympathy in her expression. It passes quickly. This house is kind to mothers who are useful. Safiye continues, her tone smooth. Less kind to those who forget where their safety comes from. You will be watched. You will be tested. There will be those who want you to fail because they are afraid of what your success means for their sons, their positions. You cannot fight them directly. You can only be better at surviving the rules than they are. The girl manages a whisper. What must I do? Safiye smiles, a slow, deliberate curve that never fully reaches her eyes. Exactly as you are told, she replies, and never so much that you become impossible to control. The advice is both useless and brutally accurate. It offers no roadmap, only a confirmation of how narrow the path really is. Still, something in the girl steadies. The fear that has been eating at her begins to harden into something else. A desperate, quiet determination not to be the one who disappears without a trace. If she is already reduced to an entry in a ledger, she will at least try to make that entry an inconvenient one to erase. Resistance in a place like this cannot look like open rebellion. It survives in smaller, sharper shapes. A concubine feigns an illness on the day she is supposed to be presented, forcing a reschedule that interrupts another woman's carefully laid plans. A group of women swap tasks so that one who is being watched more closely can spend an extra hour resting, developing the strength she knows she will need when childbirth comes. A matron who has seen too many girls led away under false accusations forgets to mention a minor infraction in her report, balancing the scales in the only way she can. The girl finds her own tiny acts. She listens. She remembers. She watches which servants linger in which doorways, who favors which women, whose words carry weight and whose threats are empty. She does not flirt with eunuchs. She does not court attention from junior officials. She learns quickly that power here often wears soft shoes and speaks in low voices. When Safiye's attendants pass through the dormitory, she does not scramble to be seen, but she does not shrink to invisibility either. She exists in that narrow space where she remains an option, not an obstacle. Time drags and then suddenly accelerates. The first quickening inside her is terrifying, a flutter that feels like drowning from the inside. She spends nights lying awake, one hand pressed to her abdomen, wondering who this new life will become and what this place will do to it. She has seen boys from the harem marched through courtyards, their small hands swallowed by the larger hands of eunuchs, their eyes wide and confused. She has heard the stories more seasoned women whisper when they think the youngest are asleep. Stories of brothers killed on the night their own father died, of princes strangled quietly to keep the peace. The knowledge settles around her like another weight, heavy as the quilts in winter. She is not only trying to keep herself alive now, she is growing someone who will be born already drafted into a bloody game. When pain finally comes, real pain, not the small aches that have accompanied each change in her body, it is relentless. It rolls through her in waves, leaving her gasping, clutching at anything solid. The birthing chamber is hotter than the hammam, crowded with women whose faces blur in and out of focus as she squeezes her eyes shut against each contraction. She tastes blood and sweat and the faint sourness of fear. Voices crowd her ears, commands to push, assurances that she is doing well, urgent prayers to God to ease this servant of the dynasty. At some point, she hears a new sound, high and furious, cutting through the chaos. A cry, not hers. For an instant, everything stops. When they place the child in her arms, her first thought is that he is too small to carry such a large destiny. His skin is slick and mottled, his fists clenched as if already bracing for impact. Someone announces the news in the formula the palace has recited for generations. A son, a prince, a new branch on a family tree that spreads like roots beneath every stone of the empire. The room exhales. Attendants bow their heads, murmuring blessings, calculating futures. Somewhere else in the palace, scribes dip pens into ink and extend lines between names in the register, connecting her entry to his in a web that will bind them both tighter than any cloth. For a few days, perhaps weeks, there is a fragile illusion of safety. Her room improves. Her food is richer. Her status shifts in ways she can feel but cannot fully explain. People who never noticed her before now greet her with formal respect. She is no longer just another concubine. She is the mother of a prince, a woman whose words carry a little more weight, whose moods are watched, whose allies and enemies multiply overnight. The future opens, not wide, but wider than it was before. She dares for a moment to imagine growing old under this roof, watching her son grow tall and strong, perhaps even seeing him sit on the throne his father occupies now. But this is the Ottoman court, and hope here comes with a blade hidden in its folds. The same laws that force sultans to rely on concubines instead of wives also sanction fratricide in the name of stability. The empire's solution to the chaos of multiple heirs is brutally simple. When one son inherits, his brothers die. Every woman who bears a prince knows this. The palace does not let them forget. The midwives who helped her bring him into the world have sat with other mothers when their grown sons were led away. The eunuchs who cradle the child now have fastened silk cords around the necks of princes before. The lullabies sung in these rooms carry more than sweetness. They carry the echo of cracked voices, of footsteps fading down fatal corridors. She holds her son closer, breathing in the scent of milk and skin and new life, and senses the trap she has stepped into with both feet. The first night with the Sultan was horror enough. The humiliation, the fear, the transformation into ink and numbers. But this new chapter terrifies her more because it asks her to celebrate the very outcome that might someday send her child walking the same path she walked that winter night. Only for him, the bed at the end is not a test, but an end.